The house always seemed too quiet at night, except for the soft ticking of the clock that reminded her how slowly time moved when the mind was heavy. The young mother sat by the kitchen table, bills spread before her like small storms waiting to strike. Each envelope carried its own weight, pressing against her chest, as though the paper itself had the power to choke her. She traced the edges of one unopened notice with trembling fingers, already knowing the words inside would only deepen the ache in her heart. She was 32, though her reflection told her she had aged beyond those years. 2 jobs filled her days, an endless shuffle between the grocery store and late shifts at a diner, but no amount of hours seemed enough. Her husband had left nearly 2 years before, and since then, life had felt like climbing a hill that only grew steeper the harder she pushed. She rarely let her children see her break. To them, she smiled and promised tomorrow would be better. But once their small bodies curled into sleep, the mask slid off, and she faced the truth she fought so hard to hide. The fridge hummed in the corner, nearly empty. Milk, half a loaf of bread, and some apples. She told herself it was enough. Children didn't need luxuries, only love and resilience. Yet when her oldest son asked why his shoes had holes while others had new sneakers, she swallowed the sting of failure. She told him shoes didn't matter, hearts did. But inside, she felt the sting of inadequacy. Across the narrow yard, her neighbor's lights often glowed late. An older man, retired, quiet, and mostly alone. They exchanged polite greetings, nothing more. She never imagined he saw the weariness etched into her face or the worry that lingered in her eyes. To her, she was invisible, struggling in silence where no one could see. The weight of those nights pressed harder as winter crept in. The heating bill lay unopened on the table, the number inside already guessed. She thought of her children under thin blankets, and tears welled despite her will to hold them back. She whispered promises to herself that tomorrow she'd find another way, another shift, another sacrifice. But promises didn't erase numbers, and hope didn't pay bills. Still, she carried on. Each morning, she pulled her shoulders straight, kissed her children's foreheads, and went out into the world. On the surface, she appeared resilient, but underneath, the cracks widened quietly. She believed she was utterly alone in this battle, unaware that someone nearby was already watching, already planning a kindness she would never expect. The first time she noticed, it was the electric bill. She had been bracing herself for the number, already planning how late she could afford to be before the lights went out. But when she checked the account, the balance read 0. She blinked, rubbed her eyes, and checked again. Somehow, it was already paid. Her stomach tightened. She hadn't made a payment, and she knew no one in her family had helped. For a moment, she thought maybe it was a clerical error, a small mistake she'd later be punished for. But the lights stayed on, and the bill remained cleared. The same thing happened again with the water bill. Then the heating. Each time she felt both relief and confusion, as though she were walking in a dream she didn't trust. She asked herself over and over, who could possibly be doing this? And why? At first, the mystery made her uneasy. She wondered if there were strings attached, if someone was watching her too closely. She carried the weight of suspicion during her long shifts, distracted by questions she could not answer. But when she came home and saw her children laughing in a house that was warm, with lights that still glowed, the unease softened into gratitude. Still, her pride battled against the unknown kindness. She had spent so long telling herself she must stand alone, that asking for help was weakness. To realize someone had stepped into her life without her knowing left her unsettled. She wanted to be grateful, yet part of her also felt stripped bare, as though her secret struggles had been seen when she had fought so hard to hide them. Late at night, she found herself gazing out the window at the small houses lined across the street. Was it one of them? The woman from church, perhaps? A stranger passing through? Her eyes often lingered on the neighbor's house, where the old man still kept his light on. She shook the thought away. He barely spoke to her, and besides, what reason would he have? The days stretched on, and the cycle continued. Bills disappeared as if carried away by unseen hands. The relief grew stronger, but so did the ache of the unknown. Who was carrying part of her burden? And how long would it last? He barely spoke to her, and besides, what reason would he have? The days stretched on, and the cycle continued. Bills disappeared as if carried away by unseen hands. The relief grew stronger, but so did the ache of the unknown. Who was carrying part of her burden, and how long would it last? She didn't know it yet, but the answer was much closer than she dared to believe. It was the landlord who finally let the truth slip. She had been preparing herself for a conversation about overdue rent, ready to explain with trembling hands and practiced words, but instead, he smiled softly and told her not to worry, someone had already taken care of it. Confused, she asked who, but he only shook his head and muttered, almost casually, that her neighbor had stepped in more than once. Her heart raced. The image of the quiet man next door filled her mind. The one who nodded politely when they crossed paths, who carried his groceries slowly with weathered hands, who seemed to live a life of silence and routine. She could hardly believe it, and yet the pieces fell into place so easily. The light in his window late at night, the way his eyes lingered with unspoken concern, the mystery that had wrapped itself around her life for months. That evening, she stood at his door with a mixture of gratitude and unease. Her hand trembled as she knocked, wondering what she could possibly say to a man who had seen her struggle more clearly than she had ever admitted. When the door opened, his expression was calm, almost shy, as though he expected her visit. She stumbled over her words, thanking him, insisting she didn't deserve it, that she couldn't repay him. But he only smiled gently and told her there was nothing to repay. He spoke quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had known loss and loneliness himself. He said he had watched her fight for her children, and that sometimes the world needed reminders that no one should carry everything alone. Tears blurred her vision as his words settled into her heart. All this time, she had believed that strength meant silence, that love meant carrying every burden without help. But in his simple act, he had shown her another truth, that receiving kindness was not weakness, it was humanity. That night, when she tucked her children into bed, she felt lighter. Not because the bills had vanished, but because she knew she was not invisible. Someone had seen her, had believed she was worth helping, without asking for recognition or reward. In the days that followed, she carried a new sense of hope. The struggles did not disappear, but her perspective shifted. She walked with the quiet knowledge that even in her darkest hours, compassion had found her, and that perhaps, one day, she too could become that unseen hand of kindness for someone else. When we think of strength, we often imagine carrying every burden alone, but sometimes, true strength lies in allowing kindness to reach us. The neighbor's quiet generosity reminds us that love does not always announce itself loudly. It moves gently, filling the spaces where despair once lived. Perhaps the greatest gift we can give, or receive, is the reminder that none of us are invisible, and no struggle is too small for compassion to touch. If this story moved you, share it with someone who might need hope today, and consider subscribing for more stories that warm the heart.